The Imperium of Man spans the Milky Way galaxy. There are supposedly 1 million worlds that are within the Emperor's domain, which has lasted for over 10,000 years. So how do they do it? How does the government of the Imperium of Man even work? Does it even work? Much of the research that was done in this video comes from the Lexicanum. There are also 2 novel series that go into a lot of detail on the Imperial government. The Vaults of Terra series and the Watches on the Throne series, both by Chris Wright. Other YouTubers have also done a lot of work on this. I got a great deal of information from Arbiter Ian. He also has a short series on the Imperial government. A link to the main video in that series should be in the description below. For real-world comparisons, I've mainly used things like the Irish government website, Citizens Information, and various media sources. I also try to use academic journals for more historical data wherever possible. This is a long, chaptered primer on who runs the Imperium and how it actually governs. Timestamps are below if you want to jump ahead. I'm trying to be respectful of your time. This is a primer on the Imperial government. I aim for it to be the first in a series. This video is an overview. I will publish more videos later that will go into more detail on each of the various organizations that I mentioned here. So make sure to save the video and come back to it in the future. There should be more videos linked from here. But now, I think it's time to get started. You might want to sit down somewhere, relax, maybe even get a snack, and most importantly, enjoy. The Imperium of Man was of course founded by the Emperor himself. Even 10,000 years after he ascended to the Golden Throne, he is still its official head of state. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's the head of government, even if it's just for practical reasons. The Emperor rarely, if ever, interacts with the running of his domain. Sure, there are exceptions here and there. Occasionally he will guide people through the Imperial Tarot. He might speak to some of his Custodes, more on them later, through dreams. There have even been a select few individuals that have been granted access to the throne room itself. The last major visit that we know about was by the Primarch Roboute Guilliman, but these events are rare. The Emperor has a vast system of governance to rule in his stead. Day to day, and barring these highly exceptional occasions, the Emperor is the figurehead of the Imperium. Yes, all the other bodies in the Imperial government will draw their authority from him and the Golden Throne, but practically, that's about it. There are some real-world comparisons to this. I can't not mention Ireland here. We are in the middle of a presidential election as I write this video, and it should come out before the election result too. It's been an exciting campaign so far, so I recommend you check out what's going on. The election will be on the 24th of October in 2025. Presidential elections here are rare. All elections are only allowed to be about a month long. Presidential terms are up to 7 years long and you can have a maximum of 2. The current president, as of writing this script, is Michael D. Higgins, who is stepping down after 14 years. This position is largely apolitical. While parties will advocate for certain candidates, they have always resigned party membership after getting elected. They will also not have any actual power over government policy or legislation. For the most part, they are there to represent Ireland internationally and to safekeep the Irish Constitution. The head of state in any nation, even when they don't have any actual power, is usually a big deal. I remember when the last president stepped down after 14 years. It was like the end of an era. Higgins is a former poet and speaks multiple languages. Whatever I or anyone else might think about him, it's fair to say that he is mostly beloved by the Irish people. So whoever's next has big shoes to fill. I'm sure that there are plenty of you in other parts of the world who have also seen your country change, the vibes themselves shift when the head of state changes, especially if they've been around for a while. All this is to say that even though these figureheads might not always have power that they can wield directly, they often serve an important role. If you've experienced a similar shift in your own country, make sure to mention it in the comments below. Respectfully, of course. Like most nations, Ireland's political power ultimately flows from its constitution, the foundation of law and government. In the Imperium, that role is taken by the Golden Throne. Every decree, every authority, every chain of command traces back to the Emperor's will, or what remains of it, by way of the Golden Throne. Beneath the Emperor and his throne are all the rest of the organs of the imperial state. It's from here that we can actually start to see some of the practical power structures in the imperial government. Beneath the Emperor, at the highest levels of imperial power, 3 organizations shape the government. The Inquisition, the High Lords of Terra, and Roboute Guilliman and his council, sometimes called his Council ex Terra, or his War Council. These organizations, in theory, have the same amount of authority as the other 2, but in practice that's not really the case. Roboute Guilliman, in the current lore, holds 2 titles simultaneously. He is both the Imperial Regent and the Lord Commander of the Imperium. The Imperial Regent is a title that originated in the Great Crusade with Malcador the Sigillite. Functionally, they are the representative and proxy for the Emperor in all matters of state. This individual is the highest ranking civilian official in the Imperium. The Lord Commander, on the other hand, is the military equivalent. The original holder of this title was Rogel Dorn during the Horus Heresy, but in the aftermath of that conflict, Guilliman became synonymous with it. So much so that Lord Commander and the Lord Guilliman have been synonyms at different points in Imperial history. Upon his return to Terra, Guilliman acted out vast and sweeping reforms of the Imperial government. We can see much of this in the Watchers of the Throne novels by Chris Wraith. Once he had spoken to the Emperor, secured the throne world, and restructured its government, he set off on his Indomitus Crusade. This was the biggest military undertaking in Imperial history since the days of the Great Crusade itself. It is Guilliman's attempt to save his father's project in the aftermath of the opening of the Great Rift and the chaos that it caused. This means that he is no longer on Terra to rule the Imperium directly. The High Lords still rule, much in the same way as they had before, but now many of them have representatives with Guilliman on his main fleet in the Crusade. Practices like this were common in medieval Europe. Feudal monarchs would rarely stay put in their capital for long and would often travel with their courts throughout their realm. This was done to ensure their rule over sometimes large areas of land when travel was far more difficult. They would have proxies, representatives, and viceroys either taking positions in the court as they travelled or else in certain important locations like major cities or religious sites. The Imperium is often written as a giant space feudal kingdom, so comparisons like this I think are fair and to be expected. Zooming back in on Terra though, the High Lords still reign over the many different bodies of the Imperial state, little changed for thousands of years. They will get representations, orders and directives from Guilliman, but for the most part they are there to govern the Imperium in the ways they see fit. In recent years we have been seeing them more and more in the lore. For a long time they were depicted as aloof, out of touch, and they were often alluded to being one of the many factors adding to the overall decline of the Imperium. This depiction has changed over the years as we have learned more about them in detail. There are usually 12 High Lords of Terra. These are usually the leaders of some of the most important bodies in the Imperium, like the Administratum. 9 of these positions are permanently held by some of the most important institutions, and 3 shift between various other bodies. I will go over these organizations a little later on. Most of them are actually branches of the Imperial government in their own right. The 12 Lords are at the head of the Senatorum Imperialis. This is a much larger body with thousands of different members, each of which is the representative of one of the seemingly countless different lesser bodies that make up the overall Imperial government. The whole Senatorum rarely ever meets. Instead, the High 12 conduct the vast majority of the affairs of the Imperial government. Also, it's worth noting that until the return of the Primarch Guilliman, High Lord was the highest rank attainable to anyone in the Imperium, barring the Emperor, of course. The High Lords are still officially tasked with interpreting and enacting the will of the Emperor, but now they have the added benefit of also answering to one of his living sons. They are an oligarchy. There is little to no democratic input into the organizations and functions of government by the citizenry of the Imperium. Instead, decisions are made by the leaders of the most powerful organizations within it. However, during the days of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor walked among his subjects, and in times when Guilliman took an active role in Imperial governance, the High Lords act similarly to cabinets in many real-world governments. In Ireland, the members of the cabinet are all ministers, directly responsible for certain areas and or departments of the Irish state. The Taoiseach is the equivalent of a prime minister in many other countries and acts as the chair of this body, directs their work and appoints its members among many other duties. They are the head of government. Ministers here are all members of the Oireachtas, the Irish legislature. That means that they have at least some sort of a mandate from the citizenry of Ireland. However, there can often be a conflict between them and the permanent staff of the departments that they're put in charge of. Just as a very quick aside here, this kind of conflict is represented in one of the greatest pieces of British media ever produced, the old sitcom Yes Minister. If you want to get at least some idea of the conflict between ministers and civil servants, make sure to check it out if you haven't already. I know it's not strictly an Irish reference, but the culture of governance would be similar in a lot of ways. In the Imperium, the High Lords, and indeed the Lesser Lords of the Senatorum, function similarly to department heads in modern governments, but without any of the ministerial oversight or democratic mandate. The heads of government departments are often career civil servants who have spent years climbing the ladder. They are well able to manage their brief and are usually subject matter experts and are well able for the complicated politics within their organisation and the overall government. But there can often be conflict with ministers who come in after an election to shake things up and make changes. The Imperium has the career civil servants and bureaucrats making up their cabinet instead. They seem to have skipped the real-world step, intentionally or not, of having the layer of elected accountability that many real-world governments at least try to have. It also adds to the satire of the setting, both in terms of a lack of democracy, but also when it comes to the leaders of the Imperium often spending as much time watching for betrayal from their ranks beneath them as anything else. While the High Lords rule the Imperium, the Inquisition polices it, mostly through fear. This is the secret police. They were established in the days of the Horus Heresy by the Emperor himself with help from Malcador the Sigillite. Officially, each of them only answers to the Emperor himself and other Inquisitors. Nobody is beyond their jurisdiction, and they are there to investigate, judge, and when necessary, destroy the myriad of threats to the Imperium and humanity as a whole. These threats could either come from outside the Imperium or within. They often organize themselves into ordos to combine resources to battle similar threats. Some of these ordos are massive, while others might consist of only a single Inquisitor. Each Inquisitor is allowed to follow this remit however they see fit. And while they definitely have the power to investigate even the High Lords themselves, if an Inquisitor is seen to be exerting too much authority, others of their organization will hold them to account. They are only really able to exert their authority in any practical way thanks to the cooperation of various other bodies of the Imperium, including the High Lords. As such, the Inquisition usually has a representative as a permanent member of the High Lords of Terra, though the nature of that organization means that there might be extended periods when this position is empty. This is the first High Lord that I want to talk about in a little detail. The Inquisitorial representative is elected from among the Inquisition Lords near Terra. They tend to not enjoy their role. I imagine this is in part due to the fact that these people tend to be individuals of action, and dealing with Imperial bureaucracy would be an adjustment to say the least. Also, due to the nature of their work, an Inquisitorial representative is limited to a single term of 5 years. This avoids any individual Inquisitor amassing too much power or influence. It also means that they don't have to worry about their position, unlike most of the High Lords. The Inquisition has a relatively unique position within the overall structure of the Imperial government and the High Lords themselves. They will often make the High Lords aware of various threats first. This means that they can often be the instigators of many of the actions of the Imperial government. There are a few obvious comparisons to make between the Inquisition and the real world. Obviously, we are supposed to be reminded of the Catholic Inquisition during the Counter-Reformation, but we should also add in a comparison to more recent intelligence and espionage organizations like the CIA or the KGB, especially during the Cold War. These were notorious for orchestrating the collapse of entire governments that weren't wholly in line with their respected sphere of influence. I can't help seeing a similarity between the Inquisition's destruction of entire planets through exterminatus, to destroy threats, real or otherwise, to groups like the CIA toppling democratically elected governments. I'm not saying that these real organizations have destroyed planets, but they have considered preemptive, extrajudicial actions as part of their mandate. The unique nature of the Inquisition's representative on the High Council also means that they have a far more defined position and timeline than any of the other council members. That means that they have been able to act as a balance on the council during more tumultuous periods. Indeed, the lack of an inquisitorial representative is considered by many to be a contributing factor to some of the worst periods of internal conflict in Imperial history, including the rise of Goj Vandire and the subsequent Age of Apostasy. Together, these organizations make up what I would consider to be the executive branch of the Imperium. It's not like a prime minister and cabinet or presidents in certain countries, however. This executive relies far more on things like inertia and fear. Now, let's talk about the people who directly administer specific areas of the Imperium. The great Adepta, the beating heart of Imperial bureaucracy. In the Imperial hierarchy, there are 3 organizations beneath the High Lords: the Adeptus Ministorum, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the Adeptus Terra. Many of the organs of Imperial government are called Adeptus, with the plural being adepta. It comes from a Latin word spelled and pronounced the same, which means one who has attained or achieved something. In the Imperium, if you work for one of these Adepta, you are an adept, which would be the equivalent of an official, priest, or a similar title, depending on the nature of the Adeptus in question. Before I mention the first Adepta, however, very briefly, I just want to thank you for watching. This channel has really started to grow in the last couple of weeks. I managed to hit 1,000 subscribers at the end of September, and it's looking like I'll be around 3,000 by the time this video goes out in mid-October. People really seem to be enjoying and resonate with this sort of content, so I want to keep diving deeper and comparing lore to the real world. If you want to support the channel, I have a Patreon, which should be linked below. At the moment, all I can give you is my eternal gratitude, but the goal is to expand it out by the end of the year and try to offer things like Discord and early access to videos. But more on that in the months ahead. Now, let's get back to the Imperium. The Adeptus Ministorum is the official hierarchy of the Imperial cult, the state religion of the Imperium, also known as the Ecclesiarchy or the Excelsiarchy by me in earlier videos, before I was politely corrected in a number of comments. This is an entirely separate administrative structure to the rest of the Imperium, and has grown to become vital to the overall workings of the Galactic Empire. In earlier centuries, the Emperor was clear in his desire for the elimination of all religious faith, and even went so far as to censure those that worshipped him as a god. Over the course of the millennia, however, the Imperium has strayed from this position. Today, the imperial cult worships the Emperor as a god, and the vast majority of its citizens will face at least some sort of persecution if they don't adhere to the cult's creed. The cult is now almost ubiquitous throughout Imperial space. Even the Primarch Guilliman, who has deep personal misgivings about the existence of this organisation, is still forced to employ representatives of it. The ecclesiarchy is in outright control of many worlds, which are known as shrine worlds, places of holy pilgrimage, the most important of which is Ophelia 7. There are a number of other organisations that fall within the remit of the ecclesiarchy, including the Adepta Sororitas, or the Sisters of Battle, and the Schola Progenium, official orphanages that train the children of those who die in the Emperor's service to become future leaders of the Imperium. There will be Ministorum priests and missionaries on most Imperial worlds, outposts and ships. They will preach the Emperor's divinity to the already devout and to newly rediscovered human worlds alike. The head of the Ministorum is the Ecclesiarch, and they are so powerful they have a permanent seat as a High Lord. When it comes to real-world comparisons, there are a few that we can make. The obvious one is to the Pope. There are plenty of comparisons that GW goes out of their way to make to the Ministorum's operations and those of the historic Papal States. Then there are also Catholic religious orders like the Jesuits. Many of the social elite in countries where they operate were initially educated in Jesuit schools. Now, I know my audience loves Irish references, especially when I get into the weeds, so I'm going to keep giving the people what they want. Today, about 70% of the population of Ireland still officially identify as Catholic, but fewer than 30% of these people will attend Mass every week. But attendance was above 90% among the Catholic population, which was over 90% of the total population as recently as 50 years ago. The Church in Ireland was even given a special position in our constitution. As Ireland was one of the poorest nations in Europe after independence from the UK, the Church provided plenty of basic services like healthcare and education. Like the Ministorum, they needed their own bureaucracy and institutions to manage all of this. These institutions became quite powerful and still own a lot of wealth. The decline here was for a number of factors. The general secularization that many European countries saw in their societies and legal systems in the late 20th century had a role. But the clerical abuse scandals had an even greater impact on Ireland, one that we are actually still coming to terms with even a generation later. The Ministorum seems to offer the people of the Imperium much of the same services that the Church used to offer in countries like Ireland. They will organise charities, education, healthcare and plenty of other basic social services. We also need to remember that people in the Imperium have tangible proof that souls exist. So, the Ministorum offers the general populace at least some sort of comfort in and protection for the afterlife. In the novel Dark Imperium by Guy Haley, Rebute Guilliman takes time to recruit a member of the ecclesiarchy as his militant apostolic. When Frater Matthew is being hired, Guilliman expresses his misgivings about the ecclesiarchy, but also stresses that he believes it offers the Imperium more good than bad. Though not universally so, the move away from the Catholic Church in Ireland is largely popular. That's my experience, being from here and living here. In the Imperium, however, the ecclesiarchy still offers the people many of the vital services that they won't find anywhere else. They have become one of the most influential and powerful forces in the imperial government as a result. There are a bunch of other organisations that are directly under the remit of the ecclesiarchy. I've already mentioned Shrine Worlds and the Schola Progenium. There is also the Missionarius Galaxia, I think I'm saying that right, lads. They are tasked with spreading the word of the Emperor throughout the galaxy. The Adeptus Sororitas is the all-female subdivision of the ecclesiarchy. They are divided into orders militant and non-militant. The ecclesiarchy is forbidden to have men under arms, so having armies of warrior nuns is a highly creative way of getting around this rule. The non-militant orders will also administer some of the many charities that the ecclesiarchy has taken responsibility for throughout the galaxy. The abbess of the Adeptus Sororitas is the leader of this sub-organisation, and they have occasionally been a member of the High Lords. Currently in the lore, the abbess Morven Val is a High Lord and received her appointment directly from Guilliman himself. But there is another religious order that has a big impact on imperial life and its government. The Adeptus Mechanicus are almost unique in the Imperium in that they are still allowed to worship their own faith, separate to the imperial cult. The Mechanicus has its origins on Mars during the Age of Strife. Members of the early cult Mechanicum were able to unite the Red Planet under the worship of technology and knowledge. They believe in the machine god, of whom the Emperor is a facet known as the Omnissiah. The Mechanicus are functionally in control of most of the industry in the Imperium. They colonized parts of the galaxy before the rise of the Emperor on Terra, As such, their forge worlds are scattered across the Milky Way. They were originally a sort of sister empire to the Imperium that was brought into the Imperial fold peacefully. They were of the belief that the Emperor was a part of their god, and the Emperor was of the belief that they were necessary to the progress of his Great Crusade. This mutually beneficial partnership has solidified over the centuries. Now, the Mechanicus is considered a fundamental aspect of the Imperium as a whole. The leader of this Imperial subfaction is known as the Fabricator General. They also have a permanent seat on the High Lords of Terra, such is the importance of this organisation to industry in general and the Imperial war machine specifically. While the Ministorum seems to be a direct satire of Christian theocracy, mainly medieval Catholic theocracy, the Mechanicus is a little more obscure, but they sure still satire dogmatic adherence to faith above reason. The AdMech first appeared in the early days of Rogue Trader. GW needed a reason why the Imperium never developed their technology over thousands of years, and the Mechanicus as we know them developed from there. Many of the other factions in 40k are based on something in another IP or franchise, but the Mechanicus are, for the most part, a very GW creation. In terms of the Imperial government, they represent large aspects of the economy, knowledge base and industry. But a fundamental tenet of their faith is that all knowledge has already been created and discovered, and it's their job to merely rediscover and maintain it. Things like science, development and progress are considered at least taboo by the majority of the adherents to the machine god. As a result, much of the Imperium's economy, industry and knowledge base is directed toward worshipping the Omnissiah as opposed to actually benefiting the Imperium. If there are any benefits, the Mechanicus generally considers them to be a side effect of proper worship of the machine god. Progress and discovery are framed as rediscovery of lost knowledge or technology. In the real world, we thankfully don't have any organisation that we can outright compare to the Mechanicum. But don't worry, I'll do my best. There has been a certain criticism laid at the modern field of economics for many years now, from multiple different points of political view. But I think the South Korean economist Ha-Joon Chang has outlined this critique better than most. I apologise if I mispronounce the name. He compares modern economics to the medieval church in Europe. He claims it creates a modern priesthood of economists who claim to have sole truth, which makes economic arguments inaccessible to the public and allows those in power to bully others into accepting their arguments. Many modern governments and economists hide behind the use of certain terms and language. They often use these tools to justify their actions that they already want to take. This sort of thing can be seen across the political spectrum, but it's an especially valid critique of the contemporary globalized economic system. Of course, a similar critique has been made by economic thinkers here in Ireland, especially as we have secularized so rapidly and also during the 2008 economic crash and the subsequent recession. The economist David McWilliams is just one such example. You can check him out if you'd like, but just to warn you, I think he might be in the running, along with Bono, Conor McGregor and the Happy Pair twins, for the most insufferable person in the country. His podcast intro alone is terrible, but I think I've already pissed off enough of the Irish political spectrum with that digression, so let's get back to it. In the lore, the Mechanicus act as a sort of gatekeeper for technology, advanced industry, and knowledge in general for most of the Imperium, and they have become incredibly powerful within the Imperial structure by doing so. They have used their clout to steer the Imperial economy towards benefiting their ideology over the course of thousands of years. They directly administer forge worlds throughout the Imperium and also the Titan legions. Despite all of that, however, they are still not the most powerful aspect of the Imperial government. That honour lies with the Adeptus Terra. The Adeptus Terra is arguably the single most important organisation in the entire Imperium of Man. But it's not one single organisation. It's more of an umbrella term for a bunch of different organisations, many of which act independently of each other. Becoming a priest of the Adeptus Terra is considered one of the most desirable jobs for people within the Imperium. Becoming one will functionally lift your family into a higher social status for generations. I'm going to have to go quicker here when describing these organisations. These are the main adepta that we know about, and each is responsible for different aspects of the Imperial government. We've already spoken about how organisations like these function within the overall Imperial government, and each probably deserves a video of their own, but I still want to mention them now. The Adeptus Arbites are the enforcers of the Lex Imperialis, or the Imperial law. It's their job to ensure that the local authorities on Imperial worlds are compliant within their commitments to the wider Imperium. They are based on the judges, like Judge Dredd from the 2000 AD comics. In the Imperial government, they function like the Imperium's centralized and federalized police force. They aren't there to fight large existential threats like the Inquisition. They are there to make sure that the wheels of Imperial government are able to keep turning. The Arbites won't deal with general policing duties like petty crime or gang violence. They are there to ensure that things like the Imperial tithe are being delivered smoothly. They are extremely well equipped and operate throughout Imperial space from precinct fortresses. They are led by the Grand Provost Marshal, who often, though not always, has a seat on the High Lords. Officially, they represent the Emperor's law on the Council and are a key source of legal advice. They seem to have a role similar to an Attorney General in many real-world countries. One of the smallest aspects of the Imperial government is the Adeptus Astronomica. They are another monastic order like the Mechanicus, but they have a very limited remit: the Astronomicon beacon on Terra. This is a psychic device that acts as a beacon in the warp and allows Imperial navigators to guide ships. It takes the life force of 10,000 psychers to power the device. Every day hundreds die and are replaced in an endless cycle. The Adeptus Astronomica is in charge of this device and the recruitment and training of the psychers needed to power it. Due to the importance of this beacon, the Master of the Astronomicon has a permanent seat on the High Lords of Terra. The Emperor will still guide this beacon from his position on the Golden Throne. This organization works closely with the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. This organization is responsible for the recruitment and training of psychers in the Imperium. These are individuals born with a connection to the warp and as such are gifted with certain abilities. Sometimes this connection can prove devastating when it's taken advantage of by the malicious entities of the warp, but these individuals are vital for the continued existence of the Imperium. The Master of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica also has a permanent seat on the High Lords of Terra and is in charge of the following organizations: the League of Black Ships, which travel the Imperium collecting psychically gifted people from every possible world. They then bring their cargo to Terra for further processing. The Black Sentinels provide security for different telepathic organizations and groups like astropaths. There is some ambiguity about the existence of this organization in the lore, at least from my research. They might represent more general security forces, but I'll leave them here anyway. The Scholastica Psychana train psychers for the various roles required. Some of them are given to the Astronomicon, but far more will be given to the Golden Throne as part of the thousands of psychers consumed by the Emperor every day to keep him alive. Some will become the various psychers that we see in Imperial armies like the Space Marine Librarians or sanctioned psychers in the Imperial Guard. And finally, there are also astropaths. They are able to communicate with each other over vast interstellar distances. Without all of these individuals, the Imperium would functionally cease to exist. The Sisters of Silence are the final group that have been overseen by the Telepathica. These warriors possess the pariah gene and are psychically inert. This means that they are some of the best weapons in the Imperium's arsenal against any warp threats. There is some more ambiguity in the lore here, as sometimes they are described as being under the Astra Telepathica, but they also work closely with, and indeed are sometimes directly under the administration of the next Adeptus that I'll mention, the Custodes. The Adeptus Custodes are the Emperor's Praetorian Guard. The 10,000 members of this organization are each a master-crafted work of gene engineering and represent a huge investment of time and resources for the Imperium. They are not only some of the very best warriors available to the Emperor, they are also scholars and were created to be able to converse with their charge on any possible topic, from science to philosophy, or just anything else that he might want to chat about, you know? Unlike the Praetorian Guard of Rome, however, the Emperor has managed to make the Custodes actually loyal. They do their job, and none has fallen to chaos, that we know of. Until very recently in the lore, they mostly stayed out of Imperial politics and governance. Occasionally, they would interject when needed, but rarely. The Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes has the option to take a seat on the High Lords if they want. This option was recently taken by the current holder of the office, Trajan Valorous. Arguably the most important organization within the whole of the Imperium is the Adeptus Administratum. While the Adeptus Terra is an umbrella organization, the Administratum is an actual body with real responsibilities. The master of it is possibly the most powerful person in the whole of the Imperium, at least barring the Emperor and his returned sons. As such, they have a permanent seat on the High Lords of Terra. The members of the Administratum number in the untold billions. It is estimated that the mere administration of the Imperial Palace on Terra itself involves the work of over 10 billion adepts. But this organization is responsible for far more than that. The Administratum adepts manage the Imperium at every level, from levying taxes to administering war fleets. They are functionally the entire civil service of the Imperium of Man. Almost everything that the Imperium does as a government comes under their remit. In terms of modern governments, this would be everyone from the lowliest pencil pushers right up to permanent Secretaries General of a department. The Administratum officially sits alongside other adepta that I mentioned, but it also has overall authority over a number of other ones. Some of these also have seats on the High Lords of Terra themselves. I'm going to just list them and say something brief about each. This script is already long enough as it is, and I don't think I'll be adding too much to your experience by talking about each of them at length here. I will again try to go into them in more detail in other future videos. The Munitorum is the Administratum's military logistics arm. It equips and sustains the Astra Militarum, or Imperial Guard, and related bodies. It is under the direction from the High Lords via the Master of the Administratum and in coordination with the Lord Commander Militant of the Imperial Guard. This individual could also have a position on the High Lords, but it's not a permanent role. The Munitorum has responsibility for the Imperial Guard, recruitment of Imperial armies, and equipping them too. They are often seen as incompetent by most members of the Guard, but they are a vital role nonetheless. The Munitorum administers the whole of the Astra Militarum and associated bodies like the Militarum Tempestus, the equivalent of Special Forces, and the Officia Prefectus. These are the political officers like commissars that are assigned to Militarum units. The Departmento Exacta manages the Imperial Tithe. This is the tax that each world of the Imperium must pay to the central government on Terra. They are regarded as a ruthless organisation. If you want to learn more about the Tithe, I have a series on the Imperium's economy, which should be linked below or on the screen now. The Officio Assassinorum, I think, is objectively the coolest aspect of the Imperial government. That might be the least controversial take that I give in the whole video. The Grand Master of Assassins has a permanent seat on the High Lords due to their organisation's power, but they require 2/3 approval of the High Lords to dispatch an assassin. They are responsible for the recruitment, training and deployment of all the various kinds of official assassins that the Imperium has access to. The Imperial fleet is sort of like the Adeptus Terra in that they are another umbrella organisation. 3 main groups come under its remit. The civil fleet administers all of the privately owned ships in Imperial space. The merchant fleet represents, by at least some estimates that have come across in the lore, more than 90% of all Imperial shipping. These are the vessels that keep interstellar trade and thus the Imperium running. The merchant fleet is administered by the Chartist captains, the leader of whom occasionally sits as a High Lord. The Imperial Navy is a separate, smaller, but far more exciting organisation. They are one of the most important branches of the Imperial military and also occasionally have their leader represented on the Council of High Lords. Also associated with the Imperial fleet are Navigators. These are a sanctioned strain of human mutant. They possess a third eye that allows them to see the currents and tides of the warp. This, in turn, allows them to, using the Astronomicon, guide human ships through the Imperium. They are so important that their leader, the Paternova, has an envoy with a permanent seat on the High Lords. The envoy has a seat, not the Paternova. I speak about them and the warp in more detail in my video on that topic, linked on the screen and down below. Then there are a few other organisations that are definitely a part of the Imperium but exist outside the central government structure. The Adeptus Astartes, or the Space Marines, the main faction of the whole franchise and the poster boys of 40k. They administer their own chapter headquarters. Sometimes these will be itinerant fleets, permanent bases on settled worlds, or even whole regions of space like Ultramar. They function similarly to the knightly orders of medieval Europe. They usually have obligations to certain regions of space or the Imperium as a whole, but, barring a few exceptions, the Imperium has to petition Space Marine chapter masters for help, not order them. Rogue traders also exist outside the rigid Imperial structure. They are in possession of warrants of trade that allow them to travel with far more freedom than almost anyone else. They are often at the forefront of the Imperium's efforts to explore and settle new territory. Many rogue traders are also powerful leaders in charge of their own sub-realms within the Imperium proper. Similar to the above are the knightly houses, also known as the Quaestorus households. These are worlds that will swear allegiance to the Mechanicus on Mars about as often as they will to the Imperium proper. They are usually feudal worlds that were settled in the early days of human exploration of space. They survived the horrors of old night in part due to the presence of their knight suits. These are machines that are only eclipsed by the god engines of the Titan legions in scale. They are massive walkers capable of great military destruction commanded by local nobility. Then there are also the governors of Imperial worlds and sectors. Each governor is given the freedom to rule their world however they see fit, provided they maintain Imperial rule, keep the tithe flowing, and meet any other obligations that they might have to the Emperor. To conclude, there certainly is a lot going on in the Imperium. A lot to keep track of, and a lot that we can compare to the real world. The Imperial government exists to rule the galaxy, not just one world. This is reflected in all the various organizations, ordos and adepta that make it up. They are rigid enough to ensure that they have endured across the million worlds of the Imperium for 10,000 years, but they are just flexible enough to ensure that they are able to deal with whatever might come up over all that time and space. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. Are there any more comparisons that you'd like me to make in future? I do think that it's worth expanding on most of the organizations that I mentioned here in future videos. If you want to know about how the Imperium pays for all this, you can check out my primer to the Imperial economy, which should be on your screen now. If you want to make sure you're notified of when the next video comes out, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification. It all also really does help to make this channel grow. In the meantime, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.